They made you feel like the most special person in the world. Then slowly, quietly, they made you feel like nothing. And you still don't know exactly what happened. You're not crazy. You were manipulated. Narcissism isn't just about someone who loves looking in the mirror. It's a psychological pattern that can devastate your sense of reality, your self-worth, and your ability to trust your own perception. Charm, control, destroy. Today, we're going to expose the 7 unmistakable signs that you're dealing with a narcissist, and more importantly, we're going to understand the psychology behind why they do what they do. Because once you see the pattern, you can never unsee it, and that awareness might just save your sanity. As the psychoanalyst Erich Fromm warned us, the narcissist does not see others as persons, but as instruments. Let's begin. Love bombing. It starts like a fairy tale, overwhelming attention, constant texts. They remember every little detail you mentioned. They say things like, "I've never felt this way before," or "We were meant to find each other." And you think, finally, someone who truly sees me. But this isn't love. This is a calculated strategy. Psychologists call it love bombing, and it's the first weapon in the narcissist's arsenal. Excessive affection is not intimacy, it's a trap. Studies in interpersonal manipulation show that love bombing creates what's called an intermittent reinforcement pattern. They flood you with validation, making you emotionally dependent. Then, once they have you hooked, they begin to withdraw. Dr. Ramani Durvasula, a clinical psychologist specializing in narcissism, describes it as creating a psychological debt. You feel like you owe them because of how good they made you feel initially. Fast, intense, fake. If someone makes you feel like the center of their universe within days or weeks, that's not a soulmate connection. That's a warning sign. Real love grows slowly. Manipulation moves fast. But what happens when that initial euphoria starts to fade? Gaslighting. You remember the conversation clearly. You know what was said. But they look at you with genuine confusion and say, "That never happened. You're imagining things." Gaslighting. This is perhaps the most insidious form of psychological abuse. The term comes from a 1944 film where a husband manipulates his wife into questioning her own sanity by dimming the gaslights and denying it's happening. Narcissists do this constantly. They deny things they said. They rewrite history. They tell you that you're too sensitive or always overreacting. The most dangerous form of deception is self-deception imposed by another. Over time, this erodes your confidence in your own perception. You start second-guessing yourself. You apologize when you've done nothing wrong. You feel like you're going crazy. That's exactly what they want. Research published in the Journal of Aggression, Maltreatment and Trauma shows that gaslighting victims often develop anxiety, depression, and a phenomenon called reality testing, constantly seeking external validation because they no longer trust themselves. When someone makes you doubt your own memory, that is abuse. If you find yourself constantly questioning whether your feelings are valid, pay attention. That doubt didn't come from nowhere. And this leads us to something even more disturbing. Word salad. You try to have a simple conversation about something that bothered you. 20 minutes later, you're somehow apologizing for something completely unrelated, and you have no idea how you got there. Welcome to the narcissist's word salad. Deflect, confuse, exhaust. This is a deliberate communication tactic where they throw so many accusations, subject changes, circular arguments, and contradictions at you that you completely lose track of the original issue. They might bring up something you did 3 years ago. They might suddenly become the victim. They might twist your words until you're defending yourself against claims you never made. The goal isn't to resolve the conflict. The goal is to make you too exhausted to continue. Linguists who study manipulative communication patterns note that narcissists rarely answer direct questions directly. They redirect, project, and overwhelm. As Dr. Craig Malkin explains in his research on narcissism, this verbal chaos serves a protective function. It prevents them from ever being held accountable. Nothing ever gets resolved, because resolution was never the point. If every attempt at communication leaves you feeling confused, drained, and somehow at fault, that's not poor communication skills. That's psychological warfare. But this confusion is just the beginning of how they isolate you. Isolation tactics. At first, it feels like devotion. They want to spend all their time with you. They seem uncomfortable when you're with friends or family. They make subtle comments. Your sister doesn't really support you, or your friends don't understand our relationship. Control dressed as concern is still control. Slowly, methodically, they begin to isolate you from your support system. They might create conflicts between you and people you love. They might make you feel guilty for wanting to spend time with others. They might simply demand so much of your emotional energy that you have nothing left for anyone else. Distance, dependence, control. This isn't accidental. Social isolation is a documented abuse tactic that appears across all forms of coercive control. Research from the National Domestic Violence Hotline shows that abusers systematically cut off victims from external perspectives because those perspectives are dangerous. Friends and family might notice the red flags. They might tell you that you deserve better. A narcissist needs you alone because witnesses threaten their control. If you look around and realize you've lost touch with people who used to be important to you, and that loss correlates with this relationship, that's not coincidence. And once you're isolated, something even darker begins to emerge. The mask slips. There's a moment, and if you've experienced it, you'll never forget it, when you see something behind their eyes that you've never seen before. The charm drops, the warmth disappears, and for just a second you're looking at a stranger. Cold. This is what psychologists call narcissistic collapse or mask slipping. The false self they constructed to attract you momentarily fails, and you glimpse the emptiness underneath. It might happen when they don't get their way, when they're challenged or criticized, when they're not the center of attention, and in that moment you see contempt, rage, or worse, nothing at all. The person you fell in love with never existed. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the persona, the social mask we all wear. But for narcissists, there is no authentic self behind the mask. The mask is the self. Everything charming about them was constructed to manipulate, not to connect. The narcissist doesn't love you. They love the reflection of themselves they see in your eyes. Trust what people show you in their worst moments. That glimpse of coldness wasn't a bad day. It was the truth. But what makes this even more confusing is what comes next. Hoovering. You finally leave, you've had enough. The pain of staying has finally exceeded the fear of going, and then a text. I've been thinking about us. Maybe flowers, maybe tears, maybe promises of change. Return, promise, repeat. This is called hoovering, named after the vacuum cleaner because that's exactly what they're doing, trying to suck you back in. And it works because they know exactly what to say. They remember what love bombing felt like. They know your weaknesses, your hopes, your dreams. They use all of it. The apology without change is just manipulation with better packaging. Research on relationship cycling shows that victims of narcissistic abuse leave an average of 7 times before leaving permanently. 7 times. Because each time they are pulled back by hope, maybe this time will be different. Dr. Judith Herman, who pioneered research on complex trauma, explains that this cycle creates a trauma bond, a psychological attachment formed through cycles of abuse and intermittent reinforcement. The relief you feel when they are being kind is so intense that it becomes addictive. Trauma bonds feel like love because the brain can't tell the difference. If they've changed, they'll show you through consistent behavior over time. Words mean nothing. And speaking of patterns, there's one behavior that reveals everything. Zero empathy. You're crying, genuinely heartbroken, and they look at you with nothing, maybe irritation, maybe boredom, maybe they check their phone. Empty. This is the core wound at the center of narcissistic personality disorder, a fundamental inability to feel empathy for others. They can mimic it. They can say the right words, but they cannot actually feel what you feel. Neuroscience research using fMRI scans has shown that individuals high in narcissistic traits show reduced activity in the areas of the brain associated with empathic response. They can learn the language of emotion without feeling it. This is why their comfort never actually comforts you. why their apologies feel hollow, why you can be in the same room with them and feel completely alone. Words without feeling. Philosopher Martin Buber distinguished between I-thou relationships, where we genuinely encounter another person, and I-it relationships, where others are merely objects for our use. Narcissists are incapable of I-thou connection. To them, you are not a person with independent feelings and needs. You are a source of supply, not a soul. If your pain has never seemed to matter to them, if your tears have never moved them to genuine change, now you understand why. But there's one final sign that confirms everything. Playing victim. No matter what they've done, somehow they are always the victim. You confronted them about lying. They're hurt that you don't trust them. You set a boundary. You're being cruel and controlling. They cheated. You drove them to it. The accusation becomes the defense. This is called DARVO, deny, attack, reverse victim and offender. It's a manipulation pattern so common among narcissists that researchers have given it its own acronym. Deny, attack, reverse. When confronted with their behavior, they first deny it happened. Then they attack your character for bringing it up. Finally, they reverse the roles. Suddenly you're the abuser and they are the victim. The person who hurt you will always have a story where they are the one who was hurt. This is psychologically devastating because it keeps you perpetually on defense. You came to discuss their betrayal, and now you're apologizing for how you brought it up. Research on accountability avoidance shows that narcissists have a shame bypass. They cannot tolerate feeling responsible for harm, so they automatically redirect blame. When they can't deny the truth, they'll deny your right to be hurt by it. If you've never once had a conflict where they took genuine responsibility, if every conversation ends with you somehow at fault, you're not dealing with bad communication. You're dealing with a person who cannot be wrong. And this brings us to the most important question: future faking. They talk about your future together with such conviction. The house you'll buy, the trips you'll take, the life you'll build, and you hold on to these promises because they feel like proof that this is real. Dreams, promises, lies. But notice something. None of it ever materializes. The plans keep changing. The timeline keeps shifting. There's always a reason why not yet. This is called future faking, and it's one of the most heartbreaking manipulation tactics because it weaponizes your own hope against you. They sell you a future they never intend to deliver. Psychologically, future faking works because of something called the sunk cost fallacy. You've already invested so much time, emotion, and energy into this relationship. You can't leave now. You'd lose everything you've been waiting for. But here's the brutal truth. The future they promised exists only to keep you trapped in an unbearable present. Dr. Ramani notes that narcissists are often remarkably skilled at reading exactly what you want to hear and reflecting it back to you. The dream of who they could be keeps you from seeing who they are. If years have passed and those promises remain unfulfilled, if the goalpost keeps moving, stop waiting. The future was never coming. But understanding all of this leads us to the most crucial revelation: breaking free. If you've recognized these patterns, you might be feeling something complicated right now. Validated, perhaps, that what you experienced was real, but also grief for the relationship you thought you had, for the person you thought you knew. You cannot heal a wound by pretending it does not exist. Here's what the research on narcissistic abuse recovery tells us. Healing begins with education. Understanding what happened to you is not about blame. It's about breaking the spell. Once you see the manipulation for what it is, it loses its power over you. See, understand, escape. The psychologist Pete Walker describes recovery from emotional abuse as grieving the parent you never had, and the same applies to romantic relationships. You must grieve not only the relationship, but the fantasy of who you wanted them to be. But here's the hope. Your ability to love deeply, to trust, to hope, these are not weaknesses that made you vulnerable. These are strengths that were exploited. The goal is not to become like them, guarded, suspicious, incapable of connection. The goal is to become someone who can recognize manipulation and choose love anyway. Your capacity for empathy is not a flaw. It's what makes you human. Now you just need boundaries to protect it. You now have language for something you may have felt for years but couldn't name. Knowledge is the first step toward liberation. The signs we discussed today, love bombing, gaslighting, word salad, isolation, the mask slipping, hoovering, lack of empathy, victim playing, and future faking, these aren't random behaviors. They are a system, a pattern that repeats across countless relationships because it works. It works until you understand it. See the pattern. If you're still in a relationship with someone who shows these signs, know that leaving is not failure. It's the most profound act of self-respect you can make. And if you've already left, be patient with yourself. Recovery from narcissistic abuse takes time because you're not just healing from a breakup, you're rebuilding your entire sense of reality. As Carl Jung wrote, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. Now you're conscious. Now you can choose differently. Welcome to the Psyche Project. If this opened your eyes to something you needed to see, subscribe. Understanding yourself is the work of a lifetime. See you in the next video.